Hello, I'm Rhys Morgan from Boston Marketing, and welcome to our first Property Insights webinar presented by PAYCE. Well, it's fair to say 2020 has presented a roller coaster for government, industries, and everyone has been affected in one way or another. As discussion around the country shifts from the COVID-19 health response to our economic recovery, it's clear there's going to be winners and there's going to be losers. It depends on where you live and what industry you work in. After the global financial crisis in 2008, it was the mining industry that was the engine room of the Australian economy. And the question today is, will we see a construction and infrastructure-led recovery in our cities? Melrose Park is a large urban renewal in the geographical heart of Sydney. Let's take a look at the economic stimulus of just one project can deliver.
The Melrose Park Renewal Project is just 6 kilometres east of Parramatta, which is also undergoing a major transformation. This includes the Parramatta Light Rail and recently completed Bankwest Stadium. The New South Wales Government has also announced plans for a West Metro, which will provide a critical link between Parramatta and the city. Work is already underway on Melrose Park North, which fronts Victoria Road. The Melrose Park project will include 6,000 apartments and a major retail and commercial town centre. The project, which will be completed over 10 years, will create more than 10,000 jobs, plus 1,500 permanent jobs post-completion. There will also be over $250 million invested into new infrastructure and community facilities, including a school, public parks, and new transport connections. The sale of apartments will pour a further $200 million into New South Wales government coffers, not to mention over $400 million in GST payments. It's projects like Melrose Park that will pump much needed stimulus back into the construction sector, hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Joining me today to discuss this further is David Borger, Executive Director of the Western Sydney Business Chamber, and Jeremy Thorpe, Chief Economist of PricewaterhouseCoopers. David and Jeremy, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
Jeremy, my first question's to you. I think we all collectively had a sigh of relief to hear that we're overcoming the health elements of the pandemic quite well. Now we want to focus on the economic recovery. How do you think we're doing?
Well, we're in the phase where we're trying to reboot the economy. We're progressively unwinding some of the restraints that we had in the lockdown, and government's now very much focusing on how to grow jobs. So it's very much focused on shovel-ready jobs or screwdriver-ready jobs. That means I think we're going to see continued emphasis on infrastructure investment and government as a stimulation for regional and precinct development.
Why do you think it's infrastructure, or is it construction? What gives something a better chance at doing better than another industry, for example?
We're trying to find industries where jobs growth is going to be key to it. So it's not just about large investment in things, it's about creating jobs for people. We've got significant unemployment coming out of this recession, so we're going to try and find investment that the government can either do directly or support that is going to grow that. But if we can solve some of our broader problems as well, then that's a win-win. So if we can be investing in our cities to reduce transport costs, to create better lifestyles, to provide housing where we've had housing shortages, the government's trying to find those solutions that give jobs and a social outcome at the same time.
Okay. I mean, each time we have a potential downturn, people come out and there's big forecasts which all the headlines like to read. They're doomsday-style scenarios. Should they be listened to this time, or do you think we're in an okay situation?
I think we've got choices in our country. We never want the doomsday scenarios, and I don't think we're looking at those in the current environment. But every recession is different, and we're coming out of this recession at a different way. We've got incredibly low interest rates. We've come through this where the government has been propping up businesses and has been supporting jobs themselves. So we're not seeing the same negative effects that we may have seen in previous recessions. So we hope that we will get through this over the next couple of years. We will effectively grow the economy back to where we were in December over the next 2 and a bit years. And after that, it's how the decisions we make as to what our economy is going to grow as. So we shouldn't be focusing on doomsday, because I think we've shown that we can manage this environment. What we should be focusing on is economic growth, that's jobs growth, and getting back to where we once would have been.
Okay. David, do you have any thoughts on that from your own side?
No, I think that's right. I mean, look, if we look at the GFC, the government went hard, went early, went households. The challenge in the first part of this is people don't feel very happy spending too much money. They'd rather save it. So I think we need to get confidence back in the economy. And I suspect that'll come over time as people are able to leave their homes and go to the pub or go to a restaurant. All of those things will make people feel safer about moving around and spending money. And that's what we need. We need people to spend money in the economy so that we all keep our jobs.
And all the consumer confidence measures show that people are concerned about now, they're concerned about next year, but 5 years' time, they think things are going to be kind of where they were before. Yeah. So this is, you're right about confidence, and I think keeping people employed, which the government has been trying to do, has been key to supporting that.
So you raised there, I guess, the JobKeeper. That has an expiry in about 6 months' time. Is that, when that starts coming off and all of the other influence that the government has stimulated into the economy starts coming to an end, do you think that's where we'll really see where we're sitting?
Yeah, I think that's right. Clearly, we are unwinding our constraints faster than we might have been expecting originally. Remember, the Prime Minister said once we shut the schools, they're shut for 6 months. Well, we haven't done that. We've been unwinding, and we're really at the cusp now of people being allowed to go out socially distanced in an appropriate way, but reopening businesses that really couldn't open before. Now, we're going to have that challenge when JobKeeper comes off, but by then, what we hope is that a lot of businesses are able to operate, that people are able to live, I hesitate to say normal life, but a normal life. Right. Some businesses will still need support at that stage, I think, and some businesses will fail, but we will be over the hump at that stage.
So as government starts unwinding restrictions, you still have the support in at the same time. So it's not necessarily a hard stop. It's kind of gradual throughout that period.
It is in no one's interests, government, households, business, that we have a hard stop. It's about transitioning those supports away where they're just not needed because the economy is working for those particular businesses.
Can I talk about migration? Obviously, that's been a huge part of our growth over the last 30 years. How do you see our migration changing over the short term and then the long term? Maybe there's less people coming now. Do you think government will fill the gap in the future years?
Migration is going to take a hit for a couple of years. We know that. And that's just because either we don't want people to come into the same rate because of concerns about bringing the COVID back into the country, but equally people may be more reluctant to travel. But we don't see that there's a reason for not getting back to the migration levels that we had. It's in our interest as a nation that we see that migration. So there might be some pressure in the short term, and we think it will be lower in the short term, but it's in our national interests. Almost half our GDP in the last couple of years has come because of population growth.
And David, I mean, Western Sydney has probably been the beneficiary of most of the migration. I think it's one of the highest areas where new migrants come and settle. Have you spoken to businesses and around what they believe the impact will be potentially in the shorter and the longer term in relation to people coming into the country?
Yeah, look, I mean, Western Sydney's really built on migrants. The great success stories that have come out of Western Sydney in business and the arts have almost all in the last 20 years been great migrant success stories. So it's a character of the region that we want to keep and support. And there will be some big changes in the next couple of years. We've had a lot of international students coming more recently to places like Parramatta down the road, which has been great. I know the universities want to continue that. I presume that unlike international tourists, you may not like to quarantine yourself for 2 weeks to be a tourist, but as a student there might be more likelihood that somehow a system can be worked out for people to come and study, and I think that'd be great to see.
We actually have an opportunity here that we've shown that we are a safer place than many other countries. Perversely, there's an outcome that may actually be that we are more attractive for foreign students if we can package it and sell it the right way.
Yeah. Because both our health response has been good, but obviously our university sector has the ability to kind of take the new load as it comes back in as well. I'd want to talk about stamp duty for a moment. There's been a bit of discussion recently. I know the Treasurer came out and said he wants to look at removing stamp duty, and Property Council has come out saying maybe replacing it with a broadening of the GST would be a way to pay for it. The other way is land tax. Jeremy, do you think this is a good idea? And which of those two methods would be the best way to look at it?
We think tax reform is going to be a force that we can't fight here. Governments need to repair their budgets. Clearly, stamp duty is under pressure with house sales dropping. We think over time there's a package of reforms that are going to be necessary. But clearly, stamp duty is one of those inefficient taxes that is, it's a tax on people being able to move around freely. We would like to see reform in that space. How you fund it is going to be an interesting challenge. There's some political challenges with GST, but GST reform equally should be on the mix. We can't see that we're going to get by and governments are going to have the right revenues and be able to take the handbrake off growth unless we see tax reform. Stamp duty is at the forefront of that. We know state governments are actively thinking about it. I think we'll see movement in that space in the next 6 to 9 months.
Right. I mean, it's a very lumpy tax, isn't it? Sometimes you have years where lots of stamp duty revenue gets collected because the property market's doing really well, and then there's going to be times when it's quite slow. Obviously, all the infrastructure projects, David, that's critical to, do you think this will give them more certainty if there can be a change to the way that we collect that revenue?
I certainly hope so. I mean, state governments have got a very narrow revenue base, and they really need to broaden it to more stable forms and more efficient forms. So stamp duty really doesn't help anyone. It collects money in large buckets for a few years and then in small trickles for the next few years, and that's not a good way to have to run state administration. So we'd love to see reform, and it'd be fair for young people trying to get into the housing market, not to have this additional, very significant barrier.
Yeah, I mean, every time someone moves home, it's more than just the purchase. People buy new furniture, the removalist gets paid, cleaners get paid. You know, there's a range of elements that flow on from that.
That's right, and some people live in under-occupied housing because the costs of moving through those taxes are too high. That's inefficient. We'd rather see people, freeing up perhaps larger spots for larger families and moving to more suitable housing. And if the tax system is a disincentive, let's fix it.
David, I want to talk to you now a little bit about Western Sydney. I think it gets obviously the lion's share of public and private investment. Why do you think Western Sydney is more favourable or should receive this funds over somewhere else? I don't know, Hobart, for example.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One, it's a very big part of Australia. So 10% of Australians actually live in Western Sydney. It's an area that probably was ignored in the past as well. So I think governments are playing catch up. I think governments kind of see the population growth is actually in Western Sydney. So more than half of all Sydney-siders will be in Western Sydney pretty soon, and then significantly more as time goes on. So I suspect our pollies, they know where the growth is, and they're trying to support it now finally in some ways through investment in public transport. And the big opportunity is obviously being able to shift jobs close to home. That's the barbecue stopper and something people in Western Sydney look forward to. Okay.
And how do you think COVID-19 is going to affect all of the big infrastructure projects that are currently going in Western Sydney? Do you think some are going to be scrapped, some are going to be fast-tracked, or is it a combination of both?
I think the problem with fast-tracking is these big projects like train lines take a number of years in the planning and engineering work before they can actually start putting shovels in the ground. So it's very hard to sort of move projects around very quickly of that scale. I think the government's going to go hell for leather, foot on the accelerator to get the big projects moving. We need the Hoover Dam, the Sydney Harbour Bridge type projects to move us on as an economy, and I think there'll be a lot of activity in Western Sydney, things like Metro West and Parramatta Light Rail and so on.
Okay, and do you think we're going to see any new projects kind of proposed during this time? And the question isn't just about transport here. I mean, there's lots of other industries. There's healthcare, there's education. What's your view? Should we expect more announcements?
Look, there's been a lot of announcements in the last couple of years. We've had a state election where almost every hospital is having a major upgrade throughout Western Sydney. There's not many that aren't having a major upgrade.
It's good timing to have that.
I think the education, though, school education is an area where they still need to roll out a lot of new schools. With this mega population growth comes a need for new and better schools, and education have got a great pipeline, actually, particularly in the Parramatta area for brand new schools. So it'll be good to see those meet the needs of the population.
Now to talk about jobs, I mean, the way that we worked effectively just changed overnight. Do you think that the working from home or the decentralisation potentially from the eastern CBD, is that going to benefit the Parramatta CBD, or does Parramatta have the same challenges of big office buildings and lifts like everywhere else?
Look, I think in the short term, those challenges are everywhere. If there's a space requirement, they will eventually go. There will be a cure at some point in time. We will get things under control. They will go. But I think the big change really has been working from home. Employers knowing that employees can work from home. Some people can be quite productive. It's often preferred. I think Parramatta still has a big role to play, partly because it's a market that's just been proven. Been there for a couple of hundred years, but it's just doubled in size in the last few years. And we've got this sort of great A-grade commercial offices, really good quality jobs and knowledge jobs starting to come in. And I think that means that, if you look at spending $2,000 per square metre in Barangaroo or $700 in the Parramatta CBD, particularly during a tough time, a lot of organisations are going to think that is going to be a better use of money. It's probably closer to where people live because it's in the very centre of Sydney as well. So I think Parramatta's got a strong future. I think you may also see the rise of these shared co-working hubs in other centres, including in Parramatta, where people might come a couple of days a week and then go back to the big workplace for the business town hall meeting.
And we saw the package before the discussion about Melrose Park. From your view, what is a smart city, and do you think that it's more relevant now in a post-COVID world?
Look, I do, and I think one of the things that Melrose Park is doing is really lifting the bar on housing quality in this area. We've got a lot of aspirational people living in this area. They're going to university. They want to stay in the area because they've got family here, but we haven't had the housing product always in the past. And I think that's the great opportunity of a place like Melrose Park, that it's able to connect people to open space, great public space, and you're effectively in the very middle of Sydney. So if you look at sort of access to jobs, Melrose Park is actually the very middle of the bullseye in terms of being able to get to great jobs in Sydney. You can access the Sydney CBD, you can access Parramatta and everywhere in between. Okay.
And this question goes to both of you. We've read recently that new housing starts have been slashed significantly. How about projects like Melrose Park? How critical are they to local and broader economies? Maybe, Jeremy, if you want to give some insights?
Yeah, the housing sector's traditionally been a not quite boom and bust, but it's had that element to it. As soon as the economy starts to slow down, the construction industry slowed down, then it's taken a while to kick back in again. We've actually needed these large-scale projects that just keep churning on. It's important both for employees, but in fact it's important for people just looking for housing. Sydney's had a housing shortage for quite a while. We can't afford the COVID-19 downturn to exacerbate that problem. We need to be stimulating or encouraging that sector to smooth it out so we don't get the boom and bust.
And David, is that the solution? We've got lots of projects like this around Sydney that are ready to go, shovel ready as they say. Is just giving them the go-ahead, is that the answer to at least kick-starting things?
I think it's a big answer because construction can start fairly quickly. Social distancing on building sites seems to be something that's working very well. And there is multipliers, I guess. If you create one job in construction, you'll need to create one in brick manufacturing or building supply. So I think it does touch a lot of people in this region. A lot of people are connected back to the building industry. And I think it's very important to get the economy moving, to get construction moving, yes.
And I've been thinking about this a lot, but given the pandemic is global and no one has been able to avoid its effects, does Australia come out of this in a better position if there was world rankings than we went into it before? What do you think, Jeremy?
Yeah, I feel we're in the top 10 here. We should get an Olympic medal for
this. Good.
The challenge for us is we are a global country. We rely on the globe doing well as well. Right. So it's a bit of a handbrake on us if the US and Europe is not firing. But you'd much prefer to be in the situation of slowed down by them but heading in the right direction, rather than being in maybe some of the other situations that countries find themselves.
David, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Oh, look, I think there's a club now that's been formed of in Australia and Israel, a few countries around the world that actually
Don't forget New Zealand.
And New Zealand, of course.
The Early Movers Club.
The Early Movers Club. We're a member of that now, and I think very happy to be one.
Definitely. Well, this is the last question, and I'll ask it each of you now. If you were the Prime Minister and you could implement one policy to stimulate the economy that's not yet been introduced, what would it be?
Oh, I think it is tax reform, and I think it is comprehensive tax reform. But we've got a sick patient now. We need to triage it. We shouldn't be doing tax reform right now, but we should be getting ready for it so that in a year and a half's time, as we've come out of this, that we're setting ourselves up for growth. Tax reform's never simple, but we've got a platform for change now. We should take advantage of it.
And Prime Minister Borger, what would you do?
Look, I'd double down on some of the infrastructure. I think that we can go harder and faster on the big rail projects around Sydney, and we can do more work as people are moving around a bit less. We can get stuck into things like the light rail in the Parramatta CBD, dig up the roads. It's not going to cause any disturbance, and hopefully get them looking okay in September when we're all heading back out to the pub again.
Sounds pretty good to me. Well, thank you very much, guys. I think we went through a range of different topics there today, and if anyone wants any more information about Melrose Park, please go to the website, melrosepark.com.au. Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Cheers.